Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Zara and today I am going to be doing a deep dive video on Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros. This is the third book in the Empyrean series. It is book 3 out of 5 and this was a book that it took me like 2.5 weeks to read, which is a long time for me. That's a long time for me, even though it's a big book. 2.5 weeks for a 700-page book is a long time for me. Normally a 700-page book would take me maybe like a week, maybe like 10 days. 2.5 weeks though, that's new. And partially because I was in America, but that really shouldn't have impacted me. I think it's genuinely just because I found this book really hard to get through. So before I go into kind of the key plot points, and I may or may not do a chapter by chapter breakdown because, to be honest with you, I don't have it in me to do that. But we are going to talk about pretty much everything that happens in the book, and I will try to quote where I can. As usual, I have my Kindle. I did make notes, and I also made some notes in my notes app. So if you see me looking to that side, then that's because I'm looking at my notes app. Let's talk a little bit about the story and kind of where it picks up. It pretty much picks up after the events of book 2. And as I mentioned, this is book 3 out of 5. So it very much does suffer from middle book syndrome. I feel like the veneer is starting to come off with Rebecca Yarros because everybody loved book 1, apart from me. Everybody else loved book 1. Book 2 got some detractors. I think people started to notice that there is a lot of inconsistency in her writing, a lot of repetitiveness, and the plot started to fall apart. I feel like what I've seen, and I've not seen a lot, but I have seen some discourse around this book from people who have loved the previous books, and I feel like it's really starting to come off for people. The mask is starting to come off and people are starting to realise that maybe she hasn't actually thought through this series as much as you would maybe hope an author would. It is very important to remember her publishing company asked their roster of authors to write a pitch for a fantasy romance series. Because why? It's smart business, right? If we're looking at it from a pure business play, it makes sense. Fantasy romance sells a lot. And particularly now for some reason, and TikTok has played a really important role in that. She ended up crafting this story in a pretty short amount of time and put together this pitch and then ended up writing the first 2 books pretty quickly. So the reason why I mention that is because it's very important context. This isn't a story that this author has been thinking about for years. It's not a story that they've plotted in advance. It's not a story that they may now have a lot of passion for because it's made them millions of dollars. But I think at the time, it probably wasn't like a big passion project that they've written. They've never written fantasy before. She's never really done this style of storytelling before, from what I understand. This was purely because publisher said, we need a series in fantasy romance. All of you go ahead and write. And she basically won that bid. And that shows. I think it shows when an author has really thought about a story. I think it really shows when they've really intentionally built a world and their characters and the like pacing and the plotting of the story. Like, I think it shows. And I think it's becoming more and more clear to people. For me, it was clear from book 1, I'm not going to lie. But to her fans, I think it's becoming more and more clear that this series is very poorly plotted, her characters are very poorly written, and that this is a bit of a mess. Because this book, believe it or not, was even worse than book 1 and 2. Book 1 for me was the worst, and then book 2 came out. It was absolutely atrocious, but it wasn't as bad as book 1 in my opinion. Book 3 is worse than book 1 and 2 combined. It is awful. It is awful. And I'm not exaggerating, folks. It is genuinely garbage. It is genuinely trash. Like, it is terrible. It is writing at its worst. That's the reason why it took me so long to read, because it was so hard to get through. And it was just not fun. There is nothing redeeming about this series, particularly about this book. And I think with that in mind, we can talk a little bit about the plot. I'm just getting my notes up on my Kindle, sorry. I'm on the last page. Okay, I think we can jump in now. I don't know how to go about this. I don't know whether to do chapter by chapter or just talk about the main events or do both. I think we can probably skip a lot of the filler because there's so much filler in this book. And I think what I'm actually going to do is kind of do it by the key plot points of this book. Before I jump into doing that though, I do just want to say that this is the most fillery filler book I've ever read. At the same time, so much happens and nothing happens. None of it matters. None of it matters. It is just absolutely ridiculous how much these characters are running from here to here to here to here, and like it's mindless. Nobody has any sense of strategy or thought or intelligence, and they're all just running around like headless chickens being idiots. Like, it's honestly amazing that these are supposed to be like the creme de la creme of the military. Every single page we are reminded that Violet is the cleverest and the most intelligent person in the entire world. And yet she is the most stupid person I've ever read. But she is just the most stupid, idiotic, intellectually devoid person I have ever read. Xaden is supposed to be smart. He's supposed to be like the youngest like teacher, professor at the school in this book. My man, what are you doing? What are you doing? How have your decisions led you to this point? Like, what went wrong? I mean, he did turn into a venom. We'll come on to that in a second. These characters are so idiotic, imbecilic, ridiculous that I genuinely don't know how you can stand by and root for these people. They deserve every single thing they get, every single bit of pain they get, every single bit of like, just like there's moments of blankness that these characters feel where they don't know what to do, and they deserve it because they're so stupid. They're so stupid. And I cannot believe that people think these characters are smart and intelligent and like actually have like a head for strategy when it's very, very clear that none of them do. They are so poorly written, folks. All right, I think we can kick off with like what happens in the ending of the last book. There were kind of like two main issues at the end of the last book that are supposed to be addressed in this book. The first is that Xaden has pink rimmed eyes, which basically means that he is venom. We don't get confirmation of it at the end of the book, but very much in the early part of the book, we do get confirmation that Xaden is turning into a venom. Now, if you don't remember, I don't know why you would, because it's so stupid. When you turn into a venom, it happens slowly. You don't just turn into a venom and you're evil and you start eating people, right? It happens progressively. It can take like weeks, months. I don't know about years, but it can take like a long time for you to make that full transition. So in theory, there is time to basically delay or reverse somebody turning into a venom, right? So one of the key plot points of this book is, can we find a cure for Xaden? Can we delay or reverse him turning into a venom? And like, what is the implication of him turning into a venom? As I mentioned, the novel very much confirms pretty quickly that he is undergoing the transformation. And a venom is somebody who wields dark magic, right? This revelation naturally adds tension to his relationship with Violet, our main character, as they grapple with the implications of that. Violet is so unbearable. She is the most selfish character I have ever read. I don't think one time in this book does she ask him if he's okay. Not one time does she sit down with him and say like, look, talk to me. I don't know what you're going through, but I want to help you and I want to try and support you as best as I can because I love you. I don't think that happens once. I think maybe it happens one time, like near the start of the book, but it doesn't happen again. Which, if you supposedly love this person with all your might and all you can think about is him, surely that should be like the thing that you care about most. Surely that's the thing that like you're going to be thinking about how to rectify the most. And yet they barely make any effort to truly understand this condition, but also to try to find a solution to this condition. She is the most atrocious partner ever. She is selfish. So not only is she stupid, but she's selfish. And I couldn't think of anything worse. I think that's like the worst combination person, a selfish, stupid person, a stupid, selfish person. So the worst combination. And yeah, our main character has both of these things in abundance. It is really quite astonishing that an author would write a character like that. It is astonishing. The other key plot point is that the gang need to figure out who this seventh breed of dragon is, which Andana belongs to. They're known as the Irids. I think that's how you say it. Irids. I'm going to call them the Irids. And they basically try to search for the Irids so that they can understand, you know, who they are, like where Andana comes from. But more importantly, seek alliances and knowledge to combat the Venin threat. Because the Venin are going to come regardless, right? So they need to, that's the ultimate threat. It's like the White Walkers in Game of Thrones. You know that, yeah, there's like political threats and other people who are like on the horizon. But the real main threat that everybody really needs to unite against is the Venin. So this is like a really big part of the book. And they spend chapters upon chapters upon chapters doing island hopping like they're on a fucking holiday in Greece, looking for these dragons and looking for allies, but they offer absolutely nothing to their allies. They basically go to their allies and they're like, hey, can you help us against the Venin? And they're like, yeah, sure, but what do we get for it in return? And they're there like, if anything, this is an indictment, not only of this writer's absolutely shocking writing ability, but it's an indictment against the military school that is supposed to be like building the future military leaders. And they are they're so incompetent. They're clearly not doing their job because these people are so stupid. You would have thought that the education system maybe would have improved their intelligence in some regard. Yet, no. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen, folks. It doesn't fucking happen. What is going on? All right. So those are like the two key plot points. There's other plot points. We're going to come back to those in a bit. I'm going to now go through some quotes because why not? Let's actually quote the author herself and show you how atrocious this writing is. Now, one thing I will mention is in my second video, I think it was, might be my first video. I think it was my first video, actually. One of the things that she does in the previous books, and I thought maybe she would stop doing it because, again, it makes her characters sound so stupid, is this use of like fragmented staccato syntax where she will punctuate after every single word in a sentence. I think in the first book, there were like over 60 or 70 instances of that. In the second book, there are about 100 instances of that. In this book, there's about another 70 plus instances of that I counted, and I almost certainly missed them. Why? What is this? What is this? I'm using it right now as I speak, but I don't use it in every single sentence that I speak. It is a very odd choice because while it can be used to demonstrate emotion, I love how I'm using my hands so much. When I'm particularly passionate about what I'm talking about, I use my hands, but I'm trying to keep them off camera though, so that it doesn't like mess up the camera because it can do that sometimes. Anyway, it can be used to show emotion, right? If it's a particularly angry scene or emotional scene, whatever it may be, you can use the full stops to really kind of show how the character is feeling. When you're using it across every single character in every single chapter multiple times, it loses its power, it loses its kind of meaning. And it makes your characters feel really infantile because every single page, it's almost like they're throwing a hissy fit. And who wants to read that? This is supposed to be an adult fantasy book. These characters are in their early to mid 20s, and yet they act like children. And to be honest, that's an insult against children, because I know no child that speaks like that. It is ridiculous. She literally writes her characters as though they are incredibly infantile and they are stupid. Why would you write your characters like that, people? Why would you write your characters like that? That is not the point. That she's not trying to write her characters in that way. Because we are told by every other character how smart Violet is, how smart Xaden is, how smart Rhiannon is, how smart Riddick is, or whoever else is in this book. We are constantly told how each of these people are so smart, they're so intelligent, they're the smartest people in the world, and yet they all behave like utter idiots. I don't get it. I don't get it. So the writing hasn't improved. It's really not. And at this point, she should have improved, because it's been, what, a year, 2 years since she wrote the first book? You should be improving in your craft if you're listening to your readers. If you've got a brain, to be honest, if you have a good editor. Clearly, she has none of these things. And I'm honestly unsurprised, because if you had any of these things in the first place, you wouldn't have written what that atrocious mess was, which was the first book. One of the things that I find particularly frustrating about this book, that I actually would really like to see done well in another series, is this kind of physical disability representation. Our main character, Violet, has a physical disability, which means that it takes a lot longer for her to recover from an injury, or even flying is really painful for her because her bones are like really weak, and it just takes a long time for her to heal. From what I understand, the author has this condition. Now, there's a really amazing thing that you could do with that, right? You could figure out a way to make that a really central plot point of this series and a central part of Violet's character. But it's just tacked on. It's tacked on, and I think it's tacked on just to be able to say that it has disability representation. And I said before that I think that's disgusting. And not only do I still think that's disgusting, I think it's deeply insidious to do that, because it's not given any actual thought. There's no actual exploration around how this impacts her, not only physically, but mentally and emotionally. Imagine you are in a military school. Imagine you are about to enter into wartime. Imagine that at the same time you have a war with your own body constantly, every single day. There is something really powerful about that as an idea. This author just randomly, sporadically brings it up when she wants to remind us that our character has a disability. And I feel like that's such a dishonest portrayal of what people who have disabilities go through. I am not disabled myself. However, I have been through a period of about 18 months where I couldn't move in the way that I move typically. I was very restricted in my ability to do my day-to-day life. I was actually described by my doctor as being temporarily disabled. It was a result of long COVID. I literally could not move my body in the same way that I do. I am now pretty much back to normal. I can go about my daily life and I'm not in pain, and I can move about and I'm not in pain. But I distinctly remember those 18 to 24 months where I was in agony all the time. I was filming videos during that time, funnily enough, and I was pretty much on like pain medication all the time. I was able to get through it, thankfully, because I had an incredible support system around me and I like really put my health first. But it was a struggle, folks. And I never talked about it because it was emotionally very difficult for me to talk about it. Maybe someday I will talk about it. It's not really relevant to my channel, but if anyone's ever interested in chatting about it with me directly, feel free to reach out, because I know what it's like to go from someone who is, you know, able-bodied and then be in a position where your body is literally foreign to you. I mention this because I'm not always been like that, and I'm not like that currently, right? And so I cannot necessarily fully speak to that experience, but I can speak to part of that experience at the very least. And the way that she uses this disability to basically like tick a box feels incredibly dishonest and feels incredibly gross to me as a reader, because it never has any actual tangible impact on this character. She brings it up as a token plot point every now and then to remind us, but it never actually has any impact on our character. Occasionally, she physically feels pain, but we never really learn how she emotionally deals with this. This is an incredibly hard thing to live through, and yet we never get a sense from Violet how she feels about having to be this unchosen leader, having to ride a dragon, having to basically partake in battles constantly. We never get any emotional understanding or depth from this character about what impact that has on her, in addition to her physical disability. And that is astonishing to me. If you had really thought about this and you really wanted this to play a part in this story, it would be a part of this character's identity. It really would be. But it's not. It's tacked on. It's cheap. It feels really like she's weaponizing disability to hit tick boxes and to get things written about her in a positive way just because she has disability, right? And this is not something that I say easily. That's quite a big thing that I'm saying. But I really do feel like it's so poorly woven into this character's journey, even when it's such a big part of her story. And yet we get nothing about it. In the first chapter, we get pain explodes along my spine, my lower back taking the brunt of the insult. I breathe through the worst of it, then accept the rest and move on. And that literal paragraph summarizes this character's journey with her disability in this entire series so far. I breathe through the worst of it, then accept the rest and move on. What sort of message is that? You have a disability, or you're in pain, and you're trying to live your life, whatever. Obviously, in a modern context, you're not necessarily fighting a war unless you're in another country outside of the UK or the US. But you're not physically generally fighting in a war, right? But you're trying to live your life and you're in pain, but really you should just breathe through the worst of it, accept the rest and move on. I honestly have no other words to say. It's so vile. It's so disgusting. So disgusting. We're going to move on because I could honestly talk about this, how dishonest this feels, how gross it feels. Let's keep going. I think I'm getting a delivery, so I might have to pause and come back. I think I will. I'll be right back, folks. Hey guys, I've actually decided to move room. So I have someone who's just come around, and I said to them, I need to finish this video, and I've decided to come up because it is quieter up here, and I think there are a few more deliveries coming today, so they can handle that and I can finish off this video hopefully like in peace and quiet. So I'm in a different room. That's why you see the change of scenery. Hopefully you'll enjoy my beautiful plants in the background though. They're so pretty. So as I was saying before, the disability representation feels really, really dishonest to me. It feels like it's tacked on. And that is one of the things that I do find most frustrating about this book. That's not to say that like I want to discount how people feel, because I think there are people who really like the disability representation in this book, but I'm just talking about how I view it from my own lens as somebody who has gone through a period of time where I literally was like in pain all the time and I couldn't function in a way that, you know, most people can. And I just feel like it doesn't represent the struggle that well. And I think it portrays a very like toxic message that when you're in pain and when you're feeling unwell and when you are, you know, at a disadvantage as well, like you should just have to push through it. I feel like that's a really horrible message to be giving. So Anyway, let's move on from that. I think I've talked about that probably enough. I could talk about that for hours, to be honest, because I think it's such a important topic. And I feel like in today's society, like in some ways we've come so far, but in other ways we are so behind. And I feel like this is a really good example of how we are so behind and we still have a long way to go. Okay, so one of the things that they say in chapter 1 that I thought was really funny was, it's going to be a miracle if we pull this off without getting ourselves executed. And then I wrote, but they will, of course, because it's impossible for any of our characters to die, to suffer any sort of punishment, to have any sort of ramifications to their actions. This is another thing of many things that I find really frustrating about this book, is that there is absolutely zero stakes. We know that none of the main characters are going to die. We know that none of these characters are really going to suffer for what is going on. And maybe there might be 1 or 2 characters that die or like something happens to them, but the majority of them are going to be absolutely fine and are probably going to come out of this really well. It reminds me exactly of Sarah J. Maas. None of her main characters die. None of her main characters ever have anything bad happen to them. They're perfect human beings. They do everything right and they never actually suffer any consequences for their actions, which is ridiculous because all of these characters, as I have told you and shown you, they are so stupid. So how is it possible that really, really stupid people are able to get away this cleanly? It's because the world is also stupid and because the author wrote the world very, very stupidly. So anyway, let's keep going. One of the things that Violet says that I thought felt really dishonest as well, she says, it's not a rebellion and I'm not leading. Xaden, Dane, Ree, they're leaders. They inspire and command for the good of the unit. I'm just doing whatever it takes to save Xaden. And I wrote, reluctant leader, despite involving herself all the time. Feels very, very dishonest. And I think Violet is the complete antithesis of what a leader should be, in the sense that she never wants to accept responsibility for her actions. She never actually wants to stand up for like what she believes in a way that would put her in a vulnerable position, if that makes sense. Like, she's happy to stand by her friends and say that to them, but she's never happy to kind of step up to the actual task at hand. And so she's a coward. So not only now is she an idiot, she's also a coward and she's selfish. Like, we're literally just adding to the worst traits any person can possibly have in one person. So she is just a character that doesn't really know who she is. And I think that's very much a symptom of very, very bad writing. Okay, let's keep going. Chapter 2, I'm really going to try not to focus on like too many side plots. I don't want this video to be too long. Famous last words. Chapter 2, we get some information on Jack Barlow. Jack Barlow is a bully. He bullied Violet in the first book. They were like enemies. He basically died and then came back to life. He is also Venin. Their whole kind of spiel is to keep him in prison so that they can learn as much as they can about the Venin from him so that they can find a cure for Xaden. As I said, that's one of the main kind of plot points of this book. And I get why they're keeping him alive, but part of me is also like, why have you not killed him at this point? He's caused so much harm and damage to the people in this world. And do you really think a Venin is going to tell you about the Venin? You're going to the enemy to tell you about the enemy. It just seems really stupid. And I'm right, because he doesn't tell them anything meaningful. He tells them like one thing, but it's like something that you could have quite easily deduced. But beyond that, he doesn't really tell them anything meaningful. Then we get more mentions of Violet's hair. As I've said, in these fantasy romance books, the female protagonist always has like one trait, whether it's a physical trait or a hobby or something that the author fixates on. With Violet, it's her silver hair. We get more about this later on. I'll come onto this probably more if I don't forget. But there is this whole like theory that I had that her hair is part silver because she's actually part Venin, because her dad turned part Venin when they conceived Violet. Whole thing. I don't know if that's true. We still don't really know what's going on with her father. I still have a theory that he's alive, but that hasn't been confirmed yet. And we still don't really know like what happened to her father. But the point is that the silver hair keeps coming up. Then she sees Xaden. So Xaden is like the Duke of, I forgot the name of the place, but he becomes Tarandor. Is it Tarandor or something? He becomes the Duke of his like family's home. So him and Violet are like not together as much because he's trying to like defend Tarandor because there's no like wards around there. And also because he's Venin, which I'll come back to that in a second. She sees him for the first time in a while and she's like, God, I love this man. And what's really funny is that when she sees him, all she talks about is his physical attributes. And again, it comes onto this lack of like depth, right? And I said this, I think, in my second video, that if you're trying to tell us that these two characters are endgame, which I almost certainly they will be, please make it about something more than the two characters finding each other sexy. Please, please. Believe it or not, there's more to relationships than just physical attractiveness. Focus on what they like about each other. What are the quirks? What do they have in common? These things. But this is just never explored. It's never discussed. We never get any more depth, not even in this book. And I just cannot buy into these two characters at all. We get confirmation again that Xaden is actually brown. He is brown. He's probably actually darker than I am. He's got tawny brown skin. And yet, again, just going to call out all the internalized racism that we have in this world. You look at the majority of the fan art, he's white or like very, very, very light brown. Tawny brown, like, I don't know if I'm tawny brown. Like, I have like olivey brown skin, but obviously there's like different degrees to tawny brown. But it is astonishing to me that when you Google Xaden Ryerson, and I'm going to do it right now, almost all of the art, like, he's pretty light skinned. Yeah. Folks, we can't catch a break, can we? Us ethnic minorities. Even when we're described as being brown, we're still shown as being white. Anyway, moving on. Then we get this constant reminder that Xaden and Violet are together. He's still him, he's still mine. And I wrote, he won't be for much longer to both of those things. We still get so much insecurity from Violet about her relationship with Xaden. So much insecurity. This person should not be in a relationship. Xaden at least is like somewhat mature. Like, he can be a little bit immature now and then, but it's more playful. Xaden is just like, I feel sorry for the guy. Like, he needs a better partner, in my opinion. Like, she is just terrible. She's absolutely terrible. So immature. Still, like, I don't think she trusts him. And now on top of that, we have the Venin thing hanging over them. And she's not emotionally mature enough to handle this sort of stuff. We get the kind of outline of what the second part of this book is going to focus on, which is the quest to find the Arid, whatever they're called, and to not only learn more about Andana, but to get more allies. Let's keep going. Another thing that happens a lot in this book is Xaden growls. He growls a lot whenever he's with Violet. It's kind of weird. Are you okay, sir? Then there is a relatively short sex scene, and it's gross. Again, I've said this many times before. I don't mind like sex scenes in books, but it needs to feel, you know, realistic to some degree. Like, it needs to not feel cringy, basically, is what I'm trying to say. I'm going to read one part. I'm going to try and not read a ton of these scenes because there's so many of them and they're so bad, but I'm just going to read you one as an example. One of the things in this book is that they actually can't do it. So there is like a forced, what's the opposite of proximity? Like the opposite of forced proximity, basically. And they can't, like be sexually involved because when they are, Xaden loses control and starts pulling magic from the earth, which is what dark magic wielders do. Normally, you pull magic from your dragon, which is the fine way of doing it, the good way of doing it. But if you're pulling magic from the earth, like, that's the bad way of doing it. And I think like the last time they do it, he pulls magic from the earth, and that's like obviously really bad because he could potentially lose control, endanger Violet. That's bad. So what they do is, because they can mind talk to each other, they communicate quite a lot through that naturally. But particularly like romantic feelings, they communicate via that quite a bit. How do you want me to take you, Violet? His brow furrows as he adds his thumb against my, you can imagine, and the energy gathering within me vibrates. Here on your back, me above you. Before me, on your hands and knees with your arse in the air. Against the wall so I can drive harder. Astride so you can control the place. Tell me. I honestly don't know how anybody can find that sexy. Okay, let's move on. Actually, before I fully move on, when they're doing it in their minds, she kind of says to herself, I'm his, but he's mine too. Doesn't he remember how good we are together? Because Xaden is worried about them being romantically involved, right? Because he doesn't want to lose control. And I thought, it's got nothing to do with that. His problem isn't that he doesn't want to be with her. His problem is that he doesn't want to hurt her. He's worried because he's Venom and he doesn't know what he could accidentally do to her as a result of being Venom. And yet multiple times throughout this book, she continually harps on about the fact that, like, how does he not remember we're good together? Why isn't he paying me attention? And it's like, are you that dense that you can't tell it's because he cares about you and he doesn't want to hurt you, you stupid idiot? It's just astonishing, honestly, astonishing. I'm going to use the word astonishing a lot in this video, so brace for it. I feel like that scene was copied out of Sarah J Maas's most recent book. I forgot what it's called. House of something something. There is a literal scene, if I remember correctly, where I've forgotten the names of the characters, Bryce and Hunt. It's not Bryce and Hunt, it's her brother. This does happen. I forgot his name though, the prince and the hound, whatever her name is. That's Game of Thrones. I'm confusing fantasy world. Her brother and the person, the hind and her brother have like mind sex. And I'm saying this quietly because I have people in my house and they're going to be thinking, what on earth is she talking about? And they're doing it in their head. So I think she like blatantly copied that, allegedly, of course. I don't want to get in trouble. They say that finding Undana's kite could take decades. It obviously doesn't. They find them super easily. It's so funny. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead because I do not want to be here forever. Eric, one of my theories in the last book was that Eric and Kat, I think it is Xaden's ex, who I hated, are going to end up together. Eric actually says about her, Eric, whatever his stupid name is, should be a great politician or a general, maybe, definitely nobility. And then I wrote, or a queen, because I'm almost certain they will get back together. We also learned that Xaden has this weird penchant for always touching Violet's lower back, like when they're in meetings and they're like doing stuff. Like, why are you doing that? Why? It's weird. Like, I get you want to show that they're together, but like, why do that when you're like in a work meeting, in a military meeting? It's so like unprofessional and kind of weird. Like, what? There's a really weird quote that I tagged that Violet says to Xaden. She says, "You look tired." And then he responds, "Just what every man wants to hear from the person he loves." That's such a weird thing to say. Like, if I said that to my partner and they said that back to me, I'd be like, why is that weird? Like, you do look tired and you should probably rest. Like, that's such an odd response. Like, a lot of the conversation in this book feels so stilted and unnatural and like things that people wouldn't actually say. They then end up going island hopping, or they start their journey and they start exploring for the Arid. And when they like go to these islands, like they lose their bonds with their dragons and they lose their magical powers. But of course, there's one person who doesn't. Guess who? It's obviously Violet. Like, she can still use her magical powers even though everybody else can't, and she can't speak to Xaden and she can't speak to her dragons. No, that's not true. She can speak to her dragons. She can't speak to Xaden. She's the only person that can do that, obviously, because she's super, super important and super, super special. More cringe quotes. "You want me the same way that I want you, wholly, completely, with nothing but skin between us, heart, mind, and body." Oh, so cringe. It's so gross. I don't know how you can find that like endearing, honestly. It just makes me want to laugh, to be honest. What's the name of the scribes? There's a scribe, Jezza something in the previous books, who helps Violet and the gang learn information from the library, and naturally she actually gets punished, but nobody else does. She's like the only person that gets punished. And she gets sent away to Aritia, whatever you call it, Arisha, and she says this, Violet, my stomach sinks. I knew Markham would find a way to punish her for choosing Arisha, but never imagined he'd expel his brightest scribe from the path where she's so desperately needed. And then I wrote, that's because you're dumb. Because again, never actually thinks about the consequences of her actions, never actually thinks about like what could happen when she does something. She's so dumb. There's also lots of really random info dumping in this book. I'm not going to read any of it, but just we get like random walls of text about things that could easily like just be a part of the world building. But here, because she writes so poorly, it's just like these dense paragraphs of just text that you probably don't even need to know. We also learned that Venin can also wield signets, so they're even more powerful than maybe we were led to believe. One of the things that I thought was so stupid in the first book in particular was how these students are pitted against each other and they're literally like, they can kill each other, right? And I thought that was so dumb because you know you're on the cusp of war, you know that you need soldiers, so why would you let them kill each other, right? Then we learn this. I don't know who says this, I think it's one of the teachers. They say, but death is no longer an acceptable outcome when you face your classmates. The days of settling your scores on the mat are over. We need each and every one of you to survive to graduation. And I just wrote, finally, you're so stupid that you've acknowledged a gaping, like, I don't know if it's necessarily a plot hole, but it's such a stupid thing. Like, why would you, as a military school, want to kill off people who could be in the military? You just train them and hope that they get better, right? The punishment shouldn't be for like losing a fight on the mat to die. Like your punishment shouldn't be dying. It should be that like you have to go run 10 laps or something. It's so dumb. It's so dumb. And they realize it in this book, how dumb it is. That's why she calls it out. Xaden becomes their teacher. We get introduced to this by one of the other teachers saying, they loaned us their most powerful writers to start your instruction. And I wrote Xaden, I bet. And then it's Xaden because who else is it going to be? In the school, so Xaden and Violet are technically not allowed to be together. There's like some sort of loophole that means that they can't be together. And especially now as a professor, they can't be together. But they still obviously find a way around it. It's another way to have this like forced distance as well. I've also noticed that this character, Violet, has absolutely zero self-control. Every single time that she sees Xaden, her pulse quickens, her like breath gets shallow. And it's like, are you okay? Like, I think you need to go to a doctor because there's something seriously wrong with you. Every single time you see this person, your like heart is palpitating. It's so odd and so weird. And like, I think you have a medical condition. I feel like there's some really obvious things that are said in the lessons that they have. Any rider can be brought low by two things: lack of a shield or a group effort. Never give the enemy the advantage of surrounding you. And I wrote, is this not just basic common sense? Like, I think at this point they're in their like third year. Why are you learning this in your third year? It's the worst school ever, honestly. We're up to chapter 17. I'm gonna like progress a bit more now. One of the things that I mentioned is that there are so many characters in this book. Not every character needs to be named. Not every character needs to feel, you know, like they could potentially be important. She names every single character, the ones that we never see again, the ones that die within a few pages. She introduces this Ruford Shana, and I wrote, never heard of this person, and now they are important. And this is the thing, she brings in characters so much that we don't know who is supposed to be important, who is supposed to pay attention to, and who is maybe just like a plot device, or who is just completely unimportant. That is poor writing. Xaden says something really weird to Violet that I thought was kind of gross. He says, knock me out. You're usually the one begging for mercy a few orgasms in. Want to see begging? All I have to do is swirl my tongue around the tip of your... Like, this is a fight for them. They're like so immature. Like, you're like grown adults. What are you doing? Like, what are you doing? Violet says to Xaden, or I think Xaden says to Violet, you're going to be the death of me. And I said, great foreshadowing. And it's probably not actually going to happen. We then get introduced to Violet's ex. Like, they were together for a bit. It's one of the princes, Eric's brother. And he's like the future heir of whatever. And he says, when he comes in, he says, I wasn't asking for my father, Vi. I was asking for me. You what? I forgot all pretense of watching the sparring match, giving Holden my full attention. Holden is the love interest. And I wrote another love interest, and of course it's a prince, because of course she's got all the men, all the rich, powerful men fighting over her. Xaden also has like zero tact. He ends up attacking Holden. Like, again, you're a grown adult man. What are you doing? Shadows blast straight through the walls and hit Holden in the chest like a battering ram, sending the Crown Prince of Navarre flying backward, straight into the rock wall. Shit. And I wrote, zero tact, grow up. And then his like assistant, Holden's assistant, Anna, like runs after him and she's like, my prince, are you okay? And I wrote, lol, they're clearly romantically interested in each other, and that comes up later. Xaden then gets jealous, asks her, why didn't you ever tell me you were with a prince? And it's like, mate, this is like when she was a kid. Get over it. Seriously, get over yourself. One of the themes, it's not even a theme, but like plot points that comes up is that Violet reads letters from her father that he's left her. And he constantly says, trust only Mira. And it did make me think like, oh, I bet you can't trust Mira, or something's going to happen to Mira, like maybe even she becomes a Venin so that she then can't trust her. We don't know yet in this book because Mira actually gets kidnapped towards the end of the book. So we don't know what's going to happen to her. I have a feeling she will probably turn into a Venin, and then the only person she supposedly can trust, she can no longer trust. I feel like a lot of the foreshadowing is just really poor. It's very in your face. It's very unsubtle. It's just not very well done, in my opinion. As she reads more and more of her father's letters to find the Arid, she says, for the first time in my life, it dawns on me that maybe I didn't know my father as well as I thought I did. And I wrote, why? Her mum was the same. Like her whole family is just so secretive. And it's like, come on, Violet. Use your brain, but of course you don't have one. He's super unhinged, Xaden. He says, with Holden, whatever his name is, coming back in, he says, it has me considering murder, so there's no chance of him worming his royal ass back in. And I wrote, this is really unhinged and like so weird. Like the whole protective love interest in romance fantasy is so gross and it's so overdone, and it sets, we have to bear in mind, like a lot of young women read these books, teenagers read these books. It's kind of propagates a really disgusting kind of expectation that women should have, that in order to feel loved by their partner needs to be like obsessive. And I think that's really weird and kind of gross and not the message that we should be giving. Okay, I'm going to now definitely push through a bit. There is this Venin called Theophany. She's like the baddie in this one and the one that they need to kill, and Violet ends up killing her at the end of the book. It's really funny. I don't think we get her name in the second book, and then her name just comes out of nowhere in the third book with like zero introduction. So even though this character is like an important character, there's no indication to show that she is an important character. It's honestly quite something. She further reinforces this idea that Xaden and Mira are going to be the only two people that she can trust. And as we know, Xaden is spiraling because he's turning into a Venin. Mira, we don't know what is going to happen to her, but I'm almost certain that she will probably turn into a Venin. So the only two people that she can trust are in fact the two people that might actually end up betraying her. But because she keeps harping on about this, I haven't mentioned every single time she's brought it up, but she's brought it up at least 4 or 5 times at this point in the book, and we're not even halfway. So poor lack of planning, poor foreshadowing, in my opinion. It's really, really, really basic. Not even basic, just atrocious writing. I feel like Mira was up to something in this book as well, but again, we don't get confirmation of that. She's always like late to meetings, and that's very like weird for Mira because she's supposed to be like on it all the time. And that's actually noted by Violet that it's unusual for her to be like that. So I feel like she's also up to something, but I don't know what. And Mira actually ends up kneeing Holden in the groin because that's normal. Another thing that I mentioned in my previous video was how there's this obsession with the colour black and how they all wear black clothes. Comes up in this book. She says, we're the only ones in black, I mutter. We're now at the point where they're like actively island hopping, trying to find the Arid and trying to get allies. There's just no sense of tact or strategy in how they go about this. She has to go pick up some books from somebody. They have to like pass some tests. I've also noticed that there's another sexy time scene that I'm going to skip. I've also noticed that when they have those scenes, they talk so much. Like, can you just shut your mouth and just enjoy? It's very odd, like, how much they talk when they're, like, at it. It's very weird. Also, Violet has, like, zero authority. She's not actually a leader. She's not got any, like, nobility. She's got absolutely zero authority, and yet she walks around like she has authority. But then at the same time, she complains about how she doesn't want to be a leader. Like, she's such a, like, walking contradictions. And most humans are. We're all walking contradictions to an extent. But I don't think that's intentional in this character. Like, I think she's just so poorly mapped out and poorly written that, like, she literally makes no sense. Okay. We're going to skip ahead now. I think what I might do is kind of progress a little bit more with the story. Oh yeah, one other thing, sorry, is that there's a lot of brows knitting in this book. His brows knitted. His brows were knitting. Are my brows knitting when I see this? This is really weird. Like, it's such a bizarre phrase to constantly repeat. I think she repeats it at least like 7 or 8 times in this book. Like, why? There's also like tacked on religious stuff in this book that, like, we literally know nothing about like the gods. We know nothing about the gods, and yet they're just randomly referred to now and then. They end up, after they get the book, after doing the stupid like quiz, she has to answer like questions. And, like, one of the questions is, like, who was your first love or something? And it was Holden. It's so dumb. It's, like, forced conflict for the sake of conflict. And I also wonder why her own father, because her father wrote the questions, like, why did he put that as the question? It's such a stupid question. They then go to another island and they see people who have silver-tipped hair. And they never come back. They never come back. They're not important. They're just there. And she sees them, but then we never hear from them ever again. So odd. Just to further reinforce that, she says to her sister, I saw a girl with the same hair as me. Really? Mira's brown knits. There we go. That's bizarre. It's not like we have a family from the Isles. And then I wrote, clearly do. Why aren't they questioning all they know about their family when they know their parents have lied to them? Like, that's the first thing you would do, right? Is you would try to, like, figure out, like, why your parents have lied to you so much. But very poorly written. We then meet Xaden's mother. She goes by the name of Talia. And as we know, Xaden's mother abandoned him before his father died. She had to, like, escape. And when they're on this island, they obviously want to get, like, more information about the Arids, but also get more allies. So Talia's husband is, like, a bit weird. Like, he's a bit shady. And I think he, like, kind of wants to keep them hostage, but they end up poisoning them because they knew they were going to get poisoned if they didn't do it first, if that makes sense, with the food that they were going to eat at dinner. Talia doesn't know about this because obviously she doesn't want to poison her own son, but they get ahead of it and they end up, I think they end up killing him, or not him, or like one of the other people who gets kind of caught in the crosshairs. Then after that happens, they end up like running because they need to escape. But because they don't have, although most of them don't have magic and don't have connections to their dragons, they're obviously very lucky because Violet does. And so she calls Ten, her dragon, to come as soon as he can so that they can escape. And they do end up escaping. But I do think it is so funny how they're written so stupidly, and yet even the scenes where they're supposed to be smart, it's like so forced. Like, there's no sense of like organic kind of intelligence, if that makes sense. We get a description of Xaden's mother. Xaden shares her high cheekbones, her long eyelashes, and even the shape of her ears. And I said, is there any other way women look in romantic fantasy? Then we get another mention of black flight jackets. I don't know what is this obsession with black clothing. It's so stupid. They're like edgy edgelords wanting to wear all black. One of the things that I picked up on that was just so bizarre to me, Violet writes in her diary, his boots are so dirty I insisted on leaving them in the attached bathing chamber. And I wrote, this is really normal behavior in Asian cultures. Like, we do not wear our dirty clothing into the house. Like, we take everything off and we generally get changed into another set of clothes. We never wear dirty footwear into the inner part of the building, or you have like a separate room for it. Like, I just wrote, this is just like weird Western standards. No offense to anybody, but like, I do find it really weird that people wear their outside shoes inside, and that they then like relax in their clothes that they wore outside. Like whenever I come home, I get changed straight away. It's like one of the first things that I do. And I have like a pair of inside shoes, like I have slippers or whatever. But yeah, I just thought that was a really random but funny detail. I'm now going to skip all of this because I've already told you kind of what happens. Oh, one thing that I want to mention about this place where Talia and the rest of the people are staying on this island is there is this kind of sense that something doesn't feel quite right, because they basically razed an existing city to build what stands there now. And they like created like new buildings and things like that. But at that cost, they got rid of all the history and they basically displaced an entire group of people, which I thought was so interesting that this author wrote that, given her track record of talking about displaced groups of people. I'm not going to say anything more than that. Let's keep going. I wrote to myself, Arik is the only character that I remotely like, because he's actually like relatively smart. It's just because everybody else is so stupid that he seems like a genius, honestly. A bunch of people die on their way out off that island, Traeger and Scylla, but I don't know who these people are. Literally don't know who these people are. Don't care, because I don't know who they are. Built absolutely zero relationship with these people. We have no idea who they are, why they matter. So it's so funny. They then end up going to another island. By this point, there's like a bunch of islands, but this is like only the second or the third island that they've been to. And yet they managed to find the Irids so quickly. And yet they thought it was going to be some impossible task, but obviously they find it so quickly. So these Irids are able to speak to groups of humans. Normally when you bond with a dragon, only you and that dragon can speak to each other. They can't speak to any other person. Irids though, they can speak to whoever they want to allow to listen in. Violet, everybody can hear the Irids speak. The Irids are actually quite interesting as a concept, because they are like very pacifistic. Like they don't believe in violence, they don't believe in war, and they don't want to fight in war. Which I really like as a concept, because dragons historically in fantasy are always quite devious and cunning. And they're not necessarily violent, but they're like happy to like kill people. But they like refuse, these Irids refuse it to assist in the war against the Vannin, because they just don't believe in war, and they believe that like Violet and the gang have like caused a lot of problems, which I totally get. They also express disappointment in Indana's development because of her exposure to like human conflict, which I quite like that as a concept, but because these characters are so poorly written, it kind of feels a bit like out of nowhere. It doesn't really feel like it has a place in the story. So that happens, and Dana basically ends up leaving Violet. They break the bond with Violet. So Violet no longer is now tied to two dragons. She's only got one dragon, which is Ten. And one of the things that we constantly get told is how painful it is for a human and a dragon to be separated, to the point where it can cause the human to die. She doesn't die, obviously that would make sense and be consistent with what has previously been said. But like initially she feels some pain, but I feel like it's nowhere near as much as you would expect given what we're told about it in the past. One other thing that I forgot to mention is that we do actually discover Violet's second signet. Only certain people, obviously super special people, can get second signets. We were told that Xaden's is the ability to read people's minds. Violet's is the ability to dream walk. She can go into people's dreams and see what they are seeing. There is this idea that we get later on is that can actually potentially be even more than just dream walking. Like she might actually be able to put thoughts into people's heads while they're dreaming, which is actually quite a cool skill. But she can enter other people's dreams, and naturally this becomes really important naturally to gain intelligence, but also to be able to communicate with their allies as well. Because one of the things that Violet does quite often is enter dreams with Xaden, but she's actually just walking into his dreams, which is quite a cool skill to have, I think, actually. One of the Irid dragons before Indana leaves Violet, it goes back to Aricia to reinforce the Wardstone, so that it makes it harder naturally for the Venin to progress in Aricia. So they have that now. And yeah, then Andana leaves to learn more about herself, her kind, which is understandable. Then we're gonna push forward. We're coming up towards the end now, folks. I think we'll probably have another 10-20 minutes. Theophany comes and they have like a battle. There's like a really big battle. I'm going to skip all of this though, because I don't care. And everybody's fine, basically. Like, nothing happens. The only real horrible thing that happens is that Mira gets taken. Before the lead up to the battle, there's like a bunch of time. Sorry, I'm going back and forth. There's just like so much that happens in this book, but like none of it really matters. And I'll tell you why in a second. But there's just these like weird, sexy moments between the two of them. Whenever Xaden kisses Violet, he always crashes his mouth onto hers. Always. And it's like, what are you doing? Be like gentle. I don't get it. And Violet says, I want to lick every line of his torso. These people have problems, man. They have absolutely like no control whatsoever. She actually writes in her inner thoughts, is it toxic? Maybe. Is it us? Absolutely. Moving on. Okay, I'm going to keep forwarding now. I want to get to the end. And then I'm going to summarize my thoughts. So they have the battle. Mira gets taken. We get a random person called Quinn dies, but literally don't know who this person is. Don't care. She's like apparently really, really good friends with Violet. I literally don't remember this person at all. I forgot to mention Brennan's in this book, but he's like such a like random side character in this book. 10 gets attacked by one of the Venom and they almost die. And yeah, but obviously they don't, because that would be like unpredictable. We then learn Eric's signet, which is actually a really sick signet. He's what they call a precog, which basically means that he can see the future, which is I think a really cool but also quite dangerous power to have. And he basically saves Violet because he tells her to like go somewhere else and to take a dagger with her. It's like a marble dagger, which is ultimately what she uses to kill Theophany, this random Venom that we learn about later on. She takes Mira because she wants to make a demand to Violet so that she can get Jack. And a bunch of stuff happens. I'm kind of going back and forth. Xaden fully embraces his Venom powers to save his dragon Sigale because Sigale gets hurt. And then that's when Violet, after that, she kills Theophany with the marble dagger. But like naturally people die. Xaden has now fully embraced his Venom powers just because he had to save Sigale. 10 and Violet get hurt. She gets knocked out. And then we basically come to like the final cliffhanger of the book. Basically what happens is she has memory loss and she awakens with absolutely zero memory of like what's happened. A day or half a day has passed. She wakes up after like half a day or whatever, and she discovers that her and Xaden were legally married. She says, my eyes flare, we're married. 1,000 emotions try to force their way through my jumbled thoughts, but the immediate rush of awe trips over the logic of how. There's no fucking way I'd forget something like that. Why isn't he here? Where did he go and why? And I wrote, he's gone to separate himself because he's now fully Venom, I think, at this point, because he's been pulling from the earth again. I think he's partly gone to keep her safe, but also to see if there is a way to save himself, right? So they are married, which now grants her a claim on Orisha. But Xaden is missing. We don't know where he's gone. He's left behind a note that says, don't look for me, it's yours now. And by it's yours now, he's meaning like, I guess the crown or like the role of being the leader of Orisha and Tyrandor as well. And I wrote, she's queen now, fucking called it. And I did. I called this in book 1. And that's it. That's it. That's what this amazing book is. It's just garbage. It's absolute garbage. Notes are done. So there's obviously a lot of unresolved issues. We don't know where Xaden is. We don't know what the nature of their marriage was because it's shrouded in mystery. There's the ongoing threat of the venin. Is Xaden fully venin now? What's going on? Is there a cure? So this is now like setting the stage for the next installation of this series. So much of this is just filler. The whole island hopping takes up like half the book, and it just did not need to happen in that way. I really don't know how people can think this is a good book. I still fail to see. Nobody has convinced me why these books are good. So much happens and yet nothing happens. Our characters are still so dull and one note, and they lack any depth. The writing is utterly atrocious. It is atrocious. Please, if you are somebody who wants to write, do not look at this writing and think this is good writing, because it is not. It is not. I think my biggest issues with this book in particular is just how like none of this story matters. The only thing that really mattered would have been trying to find a cure for Xaden, but they forget after the first like 10% of the book. She forgets this man that she supposedly loves so much that she would do anything for him. She forgets that she needs to be looking for a cure before it is too late. The dragon aspect of it, okay, Idana goes back. We'll see what that means for them later on, I'm sure. The island hopping, how long it takes them to find the dragons, like, it's a bit ridiculous in my opinion, and we could have cut the majority of that out and it would have shortened the book by about 200-300 pages. It is a 700+ page book. That is insane. We don't need to be writing 700+ page books. Generally, it's a sign that there is a lot of filler and crap that we can cut out, and that is the case in this book. The characters, zero growth, zero depth, zero real development in my opinion. These characters are like pretty much still the same as they were in the first book. Like, this is 2 books later, years later, nothing seems to have changed. And venin, still have no idea about these venin. We haven't learned anything. We haven't learned anything. It's ridiculous, folks. I mean, it's painful. These books are painful. And they highlight a real worrying trend, I think, in the publishing industry. And not even just publishing. I think just life and society, which is the dumbing down of literature. And I do want to be very clear, there is absolutely nothing wrong with liking this series. There is absolutely nothing wrong with liking, you know, popcorn fiction or things that are like not particularly complex or particularly mentally stimulating. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. But I think what is worrying is how this is like one of the most sold series in the world. And what worries me is that people say this is good writing. I think if people acknowledge more that this is like a really poorly written series, but they still like it, I'd be like, yeah, cool. I think it's the fact that like people genuinely believe these books are well written that like genuinely scares me. And it kind of highlights this anti-intellectualism trend that we're seeing, I think. This hatred for anything that is like complex, academic, that is trying to be anything more beyond the surface. And it makes me feel a bit sick actually thinking about it, because if this is the way literature is going, this is the way where society is going, where movies, video games, comics, music is going to become more and more like this, where it's so surface level, so inconsistent, so vapid. That's concerning. It's really concerning. Not just as a reader, a writer, a reviewer. It's concerning as a human being. So I think we'll stop there. I'll leave you with that thought. It was utter trash. It was 0 stars. Unfortunately, you can't give 0 stars on Goodreads. So I have to give it a 1. I think I put 0.5. I don't know why I put that. It's 0 stars. It's terrible. The worst one of the 3, which is an achievement in itself. And will I read the next 2 books? I feel like I'm 3 books in now, and I'm curious to see how this series ends, because I really want to see if there is a long game here that I'm just missing. My gut feeling and what I think I've said in this video shows that that's not the case. But maybe I'm wrong. There's always a chance that I'm wrong, right? And I think at this point I've read 3 out of 5 books. It kind of makes sense for me to continue on with this series. And as I've said in one of my previous videos, I do actually like now and then reading poorly written books because it shows to me the exact type of writer I do not want to be. So I'm happy to do it from that perspective as well. So there we have it. If you like this video, please do give it a thumbs up. It's a long video. It's going to take me a while to edit as well. If you have read it, feel free to let me know your thoughts down below. If you liked it, if you didn't like it, be respectful. We can have a good discussion. If you haven't read it and you just enjoyed this, feel free to put like a, I don't know, what's a good emoji that people can put down below? Is there a dragon emoji? Like a dragon emoji? If there's not a dragon emoji, put like a crocodile. I don't know why. But yeah, if you read it, if you haven't read it and you don't want to read it, but you watch this video all the way through, do that. And I appreciate it if you did do that. Thanks for watching, folks. Hope you're reading something good. I need to go read like some Dostoevsky now to clean the palate, I think. Stay safe, everybody. Take care. And I will see you very, very soon. Bye.